And just a quick review, we created this email recipe link that goes to the recipe controller. That goes to this email recipe method in the recipe controller. And that in turn calls the recipe mailer that we generated, calling the send recipe method. And so that's in the, got to get the right files up here. That's in the mailer, recipe mailer. And so this send recipe then gets called, which sets some variables and calls the actual mail program. And that uses the views that we created for this particular email. All right, so that's just a quick run through what happens. But what we left it at yesterday was that this email recipe has nothing associated with which recipe to email. All it says is call email recipe. And whereas these show methods, for instance, and edit, if you look at the URL down here, you see it's got a /274. What's the 274 again? That's the ID of that particular recipe. So if I want to email one particular recipe, then I need to add that recipe ID to this URL so that I can pass it all the way through to my mailer system. Okay? So where would I change that? How can I change what this URL looks like? In the routes. Very good. So I go to my routes file, and this is the line that we created yesterday, and that says this is the URL that the public sees. This is the controller and the method that's going to get called. And what was this last as for? The variable or the method inside of Rails that I can use in my coding, in my URL generation, my link to methods and things like that. So what I need is to pass the ID. So I can look down here. How did I do that here for my store, passing the ID of my store? So I just added exactly what I wanted, and I'm going to take and go ahead and do the format as well. So I copy that, and I'm going to put this at the end of my email recipe. And that's going to be passed how? How is my email recipe method in my recipes controller get access to this ID? Params. All right, good. And the name here, the :ID, is the name of the parameter value, the key in the params hash, to get that value back out so I can play with it. All right, so let's go then. Where I use this email recipe path was in my recipes index page, and I use this email recipe path. And what I need now, though, is to be able to pass the ID of this particular recipe. And remember, I'm looping inside of all of my recipes. And so I need to get the ID of this particular recipe for this row in my table. So how do I do that? I pass it as a parameter. So I'm going to pass in the recipe, which has the whole recipe object, one record, and the routing system automatically knows this is an object and picks up the ID column of that object. So this is going to pass in email recipe path and create a /ID at the end of it. So let's just go reload that page. Get rid of that one. Reload my little pagey here. And if I look at my URLs now, it says /274, /309, etc. So all that data is now going to be passed. If I click on that, it's going to actually send my email. But I have to receive that data now, too. So my email should have gotten sent here. Pardon me? No. I'm just not using it. I'm just not using it. I'm sorry?
What if it says like your path and then period ID instead of /?
Then your email recipe route is probably wrong. This route is probably wrong here.
Okay.
All right. So here's the email that it sent out. But again, I sent the ID to the method, but I'm not doing anything in that method to get the ID. So I have to fix that up. I need to go into my recipe controller, and this is where I'm going to receive the ID. I can get the ID from what again? How do I get the ID from this URL? Okay, params sub ID, right? So if I can just pass that here, param sub ID, that's going to give me an ID, a number. That's all that is a number, right? 274. That 274 then is going to get passed into my send recipe method that I have to go get. I have to go get that value. So let's go look at that method now in my recipe mailer. I have to receive that on this end. So I need to set a variable in my parameter list to receive that value. So it's going to be called the recipe ID because I'm going to use that. Okay? Everybody with me so far? All right. So given a recipe ID, how can I look up in my recipe table to get the entire record from that ID? All right, good. So I'm going to find, and I'm going to pass in recipe ID. And that will give me a single recipe, so I'm going to change my variable name so it makes sense. My single instance variable recipe will hold an entire record, an entire recipe object that has things like the name and the made by and the ingredients and all that kind of stuff. All right? Everybody with me so far? I'm passing the parameter from the URL into the recipe controller. It just passes it along to my emailer. And in my emailer, I'm doing a model lookup. I'm looking up in my database for some information so that my email can actually have more specific information in it. So now, how would I display some of the values from my recipe into my email itself? Where do I do that? Okay, in the template, in the body of my email, I've got two of these. And now RubyMine lets you click, like it did in the controllers, to go to a view, right? The view associated with that method or that action. In this case, I can do the same thing. Do I want to go to the text version of it or the HTML version of it? Okay, so let's go to the HTML version. And here, I don't want to go through each recipe because all I have is a single recipe, right? Now, I'm not looping through all of them. So let's change this. And I can start to say something like recipe.name. I can print that out. Yep. Need an equal sign. I'm going to print that out. I'm going to take this out. I can actually define this with some HTML structure now and put a H1 around this. And then maybe a paragraph and output the recipe.madeBy, something like that. Then another paragraph and recipe.ingredients. And this data now is going to pull from this recipe object and display the data in HTML format in the email itself. Now, I'm going to have to do the same thing to my text version. So I'll go to my text version of my recipe. And for now, I'm just going to take this out so I don't have a crash. Because a single recipe object doesn't have an each method associated with it, right? Recipe array would have an each method, but a single object does not. So I just don't want it to crash right now. All right, so let's go back and send this email. And this is Dave's Bleeding Edge recipe here. So I'm going to email that one. Sorry, it's off the screen. Email this recipe. Click. That goes through the recipe controller all the way down, and let's see where the next email in the log got sent to. if I didn't crash. It might not have clicked. Let's see. So that's the prior one. So I must not have clicked. Click. There. Now it's working. Yeah, you have to actually click to get something to work. All right. So here is the message. Dave's Bleeding Edge. This is the email now. This is the recipe.name surrounded by my H1 tags. I've got a P tag around that's interesting. That's interesting that I got your name in here as a random. That's bizarre. Did you hack my database there? And then my ingredients with all, this is HTML in here, right? But is this truly HTML? Right? I have a problem with this, right? This is going to show up in my email as &LT, so how do I fix that? HTML safe. Same thing as if I'm displaying a page, I need to call the same kind of things on here. So now when I send this out again, I'll click it off screen and send another one. And look at now my recipe has it all correct. So it's got my HTML. Remember, this is all from the tiny MCE gem that let them type in some HTML, some WYSIWYG editor. So this is all from that field. All right? Isn't that great? Now, one quick thing. What if I want the subject of my email? Where's my subject? Here it is, up here. So what if I want the subject line to have the name of the recipe along with some other information about maybe the site that it came from? Okay, I'm going to do that in the email controller. So in my recipe emailer, this is where I'm setting my subject line. So how do I get at something like, I could do something like a new recipe from, let's just do it like this, a new recipe. Now how do I get the title or the name of this recipe in this string? Very, very good. So I'm going to put it in the interpolated value here, recipe.name. And now when it prints, the subject line is going to have the name of the recipe, Dave's Bleeding Edge. So let's just test that real quick. Email my recipe again. Not a very good recipe? No, probably not. All right, so here's the next message. A new recipe, Dave's Bleeding Edge. And that will show up then in the email client as the title of the subject line of my email. Okay? Any questions on any of that? I'm sorry? Recipes controller is here. So all I'm doing is I'm passing the parameter, the number of the ID of the recipe, into the send recipe, and then let send recipe do all the lookups in the SQL and find the data. Yes?
Could you pass the whole brands key in there?
Sure. You can pass anything you want in here. And you could pass multiple anythings you want in there. Yeah, anything that you think you're going to need to create your email, you would do that.
So then could you theoretically go back and put where you had recipe, could you put a comma and then pass current user?
Sure, right here.
Well, right there was where I meant on your page, but I didn't know you could do it in the controller right there.
Yeah, you can do it anywhere. The current user is defined by devise.
I tried to do it in the mailer, and it said unknown parameter.
Yeah, because the mailer is not directly related to a browser session.
Okay.
So in this case, you'd have to do it here. You'd have to pass in current user here.
So then for our end, I can do it in the articles controller where I'm
Sure.
passing that stuff.
Yes. And then on the mailer, I'd have to receive that value.
Yeah, obviously.
as current user, and then utilize that information. Then that's an object I can look at current user.email, and I would probably use current user.email here. But be careful about current user. If I say email me this article, who's it going to go to? Me and only me. As an admin, I'm wanting to email the article to everybody else, not me.
Well, didn't you say we needed one of these buttons that would send that the user could send
No,
to themselves?
not to send to themselves. They do not have control over sending themselves an email in my final. I mean, you can, obviously that might be a nice thing, email me myself my own recipe. It doesn't have it in there.
So then in that case, you just go user.all.email.
Right. Well, not quite, because that's an array of all the user objects.
Okay, so it wouldn't accept it as multiple.
No. And I don't want to ever expose everybody's email to everybody else. Have you ever gotten an email that says to Dave and Joe and Don, and I now see everybody's email, right? Bad thing, exposing your entire user base's emails to everybody else in the world. So you would only send a single email one at a time to that particular user. So how would you do that?
Well, you
You loop through the users and call, and you can do that anywhere.
probably want to do it right there inside the defined recipe.
You could do it loop around here and change the to here, call mail multiple times. Do a user.all.each do around this entire thing. That would send one.
Do it on the lane and invoke the mailer every time.
You could do it on the recipe controller here. In the send, I could loop around this block of code, so there's multiple places I could do that.
Seems like you'd want to do it at the as lowest possible place so that you would repeat the least amount of code. So that like doing it right around the mailer would probably be the best, wouldn't it? That way it doesn't have to go through all these negligible time differences.
Yeah, I don't think it makes that much
It
difference.
doesn't make much of a difference, but it's just a matter of what do you think would be the best to do it. Honestly, I would run it around either the controller or probably around the controller,
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
and I would call the send every single time.
What about the news? Shouldn't you just send it to everyone in the newsletter?
Yeah, right. So in this case, when in my homework final, I say it should only send to those that requested the newsletter. So I wouldn't say users, not all. No,
Everyone in that one, and then the other side.
I think I fixed that in my latest version.
All right.
But you're only going to send email if I click on this email recipe for the final anyway. I want this to go to everybody in the user database that requested newsletter emails.
Yeah, all you have to do is inside the loop check for if user has newsletter true or whatever you have it set at. Personally, I just have it Boolean to simple enough.
Yes, I would do something maybe like this: users dot or user dot find by newsletter. Dot each.
Oh, that's interesting.
That does a SQL selection, and I'd have to test if I have my syntax right, but that does a SQL query in my database to find all the users that have a newsletter column of true. That gives me an array of all the user objects. I loop through each one of those, and I send an email out to each one.
Well, that's actually more efficient.
That's more efficient, right?
Because you're letting SQL only return
Exactly.
instead of making Ruby.
Because if I've got a million users in my database and only 50,000 of them signed up for my newsletter, I don't want to look through a million users. I let the database figure that out.
And SQL's faster at it.
Actually, this probably is not a symbol. It would just be true. No. Because it's a Boolean, you want to use true and false because you don't know what the database, the underlying database, uses for its true and false. Some databases actually use the letter 0 and the letter 1, or
And some of them actually use true false.
true and false. So you want to let use the actual true and false, and let the underlying Rails structure figure out what that should be. All right, good questions. Any other question on where we're at so far? So one more thing in the email. Let's look at, I have in my email model, where's my models? My recipe model, I think I have an image, right? So how might I display the image in the email that goes to the user? Wouldn't that be nice to have an image in an HTML email? Now, obviously, this is not going to work in a text-only email. The image is just not going to show up. So this is only going to be in my HTML version of my mailer, which is here. And let's say I want to actually put the image. We'll put it in a p tag just to be nice. And I want to display the @recipe.image. All right. How would I do that to display it as an actual image? Image tag, right? We're displaying HTML just like a view. So image tag of recipe.image. All right. So let's see what happens when I do that. I'll email myself a new version of this. And here we go. Here's the new one. Here's the text version. Here's the email version. And here's the image. All right. What is wrong with this image tag?
It's going to look locally on the machine and not across the net.
Absolutely. Good point. All right. So
I was wondering, as soon as you did that, I was like, that's not going to...
it's not going to work, right? This is going to show up as a broken link on the email when they get it. Because that says, look on my local machine in a folder called assets for a file called babybackribs.jpg.
And it's going to look at C root, so it's going to look for a folder in your on the C drive root.
Right, whatever your root is of your web server, of your computer, local computer, sorry. So that's not going to work. So now we get to the point of another method that we hadn't used much. Was a URL tag. Okay, continue on. Because this is just, we're storing this in the database as a relative URL, correct? So I'm going to have to make this into a bigger URL and let the image tag go to that. So in this case, there's not a nice Railsy way to do this that I can think of offhand. So I'm going to have to do something like this, add in a full path. Obviously, localhost is not going to work, right? And then, no, that's a file path name. All right, so that's going to create a better URL. So let's just run that and make sure that that's going to work.
Theoretically, it would work because localhost would be a domain.
Right. Yeah, but obviously that's going to be your real website IP, domain name. So that actually works. The source is now a full URL, and it will go out when the email is rendered. It's going to go out and fetch that image from the server and display your email correctly. Some clients have on them. Some email clients now say, like Outlook, will not display images that are outside of its email, and actually you have to click on a button that says show me the images, because it can be a security risk to display images, to actually go out and get stuff like that. But yeah, right, so it's pretty common. What I was talking about, the shortcut, if I wanted to display an image, let's say I want to give you a link back to my website, so you can come back to this particular recipe from the email, right? I want to go look at it online. Now, that's another way to drive traffic back to your site, right? So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a link to, and I already know what my recipe is. Can I just say @recipe, I'd have to say recipe path @recipe. All right, so let's see what that generates when I email. Yeah, that's what I want to get to. No route matches, nothing. Why is that? No recipe path. I don't know. Let's go look. Let's run my rake routes. Any questions while this runs? Chord. So let's look at my recipe, all my recipes. Yeah, it should just be recipe path. That should work. Why is that not working? Well, this is, did I spell recipe wrong? That recipe. I shouldn't have to do that, but let's try it. Same error. Oh, I need more in my link. Recipe, right? I want to go to the name of my recipe, maybe, and then the link. And then I don't think I need my ID. That's going to find it automatically. You got to have your link to method values correct. There we go. So here we go. Let's go look at our email now. And here's a link back. So here's what I was trying to get at. This link now goes to a relative URL again, right? That will go nowhere. I need a full URL to get back to this. All right, so instead of recipe path, remember we said this a while ago that these get two different methods associated with them created for me automatically. Whatever this is underscore path or whatever this is underscore URL. The URL is a fully qualified URL to this rather than a local relative URL. So if I change that to recipe URL and pass it the ID of where I want to get to, this should look better. I'll email the recipe again. Missing host to link to. All right, so this is an error that happens because I haven't provided the default host, and I need to do this in my environment. So I'm gonna set this value here in my environment file, which we haven't played with much. We're going to get to that here in a minute. Yeah, I might not have done it for the device. Your device needed this as well. I might have taken it out. I don't see that it's there. So, yeah, I didn't want to send out the email. So I'm going to say this host here is going to be set to, it's going to be config, it's going to be set to whatever it is, local host 3000. Right? Hopefully that's right. No, I don't think so. Now, the problem is I have to restart my server because this is a configuration file that only gets loaded on startup. So I'm going to stop and restart with that one button. Hopefully this will work. Nope, got a problem. All right, so method missing. I haven't done this in a while. Let me think about if this is going to work now. It's not running. Got to run. Huh?
You didn't run it at all, so. No, not running your server. The response you get from your host.
Come on. A lot of information here, right?
Oh, no, I'm downloading it as proof that Dave doesn't know everything.
I don't know everything. That's right. And that's why I teach you to use Google, right? Google, very important. So here's the email. I have it set correctly now. Here's my email, and my link should be right. Here we go. So it uses this default URL options here to create a fully qualified URL. So I just need to put in this value here. And the link to method takes that and creates a full URL. All right, so now if I were to display that in a email client, I could click on that and it would go to my real host. Obviously, you're not going to use localhost. You're going to use daveshotrecipes.com or whatever you're going to have here. All right, any questions on that? All right, I want to show you tomorrow how to set it up to use Google Mail to send out, to actually deliver the email. Right now we've been looking at it and in the log just to see the email, but we want to actually ship it out to the web and be able to look at it in an email client. So I'll do that tomorrow.
Send it to a server if you give it to
Yeah, you have to set some configuration options. I can tell it where my SMTP server is, and it'll send it out through that.
Oh, so you're going to piggyback from Google.
I'm going to let Google send my email for me. Now, Google will let you send up to 100 emails a day, I think, so it's not a practical solution for a real site. They're going to block you at some point, and you're not going to be able to send out 50,000 emails. So you'll have to set up your own email server to do that. But we'll do that tomorrow. I wanted to do one more thing to get you on to the final. There was another option that said, what happens when I create a new article and it's published? What I require you to do when I finally publish a new article? To all the users, right? So it's similar to my email, my recipe here. It's similar to that, but it does it automatically when I create a new article and I publish it. All right, so where do you think that might be a good place to put that invocation? Remember, your emailer has to have some way of invoking that to happen. All right, that is one possibility. I could do it here in the recipe controller when they do the update, perhaps. And then I might have to do it in the create, whenever they do a save, right? So that's two places here. This is update attributes. If that comes back true, or this, so two places is not a good thing. I can do it in the model, all right? So in the model itself, we haven't done much here, but I can actually create some filters, much like the controller has some before filters. There's a filter called after save. That means that after I've successfully saved data to the database, and that's on an update or a save, anytime a value changes, it's going to be sent through this method. All right, so what I do is I say, after save, I want you to call this method name, and I'm going to call it send recipes. So this is the actual definition, my actual method name, and this is where something's going to happen when I create a new recipe. All right, so, and I also wanted to show you some logging information. Sometimes it's useful to put logging so you can see what's going on. I'm going to put a log information I can call logger.info, which sends this string to this log that I've been looking at. All right, that'd be kind of useful to see, is my method even triggering? All right, so let's do that. Let's go and update my Dave's Bleeding Edge here. And let me edit and change it to. That's funny. Just add some more stuff here. Way cool. Okay, so that will force the change, the update method, the update attributes to trigger because something changed. So I'm going to say update, and it's going to go through, and it should write that log line then to my log. And I put the long asterisk in there so I can see it easier, because there's a lot of stuff in here, right? So I'll scroll all the way down. This is where it puts it. All right, here we go. So this is the line that got sent. It's going to send the recipes Dave's Bleeding Edge. So inside of this method, I have access to all of the column names, the data that was saved to the database. So this is already saved. It's all updated. The database has said it's okay. I have access to that entire column. Record, the entire record. So I can have access to the name, the made by, the ingredients, all that information. Now, what might I do in this method to send all my users an email? Okay, yeah, I could piggyback on the other email that I had, but something I'm going to do user.find by published, which I don't have in my recipe, you might have in your system, and I'm going to true for all of my values. I'm going to do an each, do, and what do I have here? What is inside my goalposts? It's a singular user object, and I might call the emailer, which I'm doing similar to this in my controller. I might do something like this, and just that line. And it's going to actually call the mailer at this point. And instead of the recipe ID, the params, because that's not valid here, I'm going to pass in the ID. Okay, that is part of the column, one of the columns in my recipe object. And I might pass along my user, right? I need to have the user value so that I could get the email of that particular user out in my send mail and pass it along through. All right, so I might do something like that. There I practically wrote the whole method for you right there. Does that make sense? So when it finally publishes and it's true, I might also have to check, did this particular recipe get published? Now, I don't have a published column, but I could do something like, I want to only do this if my published is true. Something like that. I had a column called published without the question mark. The published with the question mark is a Rails shortcut to say, is this value a true or false? So I can say, if this record is published, then go ahead and ship me out this recipe email to everybody in my list that wants it. All right? Anybody questions on that? I don't have a published column in my recipe, but that would work for your articles. Whatever you have, yes. I'm not going to write that for you. By newsletter, fine. User find by newsletter. That's going to be on your user record that you've added that Boolean to your database. All right. All right. So that's it for today. Any questions? Tomorrow we'll actually send the email out through Google and show you how to configure that. And then we're pretty much done with that.